We are teetering on the edge of the June flip over to the calendar, so we thought we'd bring you guys some redraft rankings, best ball rankings. If you guys are dynasty contenders, you could obviously use this advice as well. Today, we're going to be looking at our top 24 in-depth running backs for redraft and best ball formats, as well as our kind of overall top 40 as we get through this video, going through some of the immediate projections, the short-term projections of these guys. And of course, if you guys do want to take some of this advice right into action, you can head on over to Underdog Fantasy and do some best ball mania drafts, do some Pomeranian drafts, which just went live today, do some puppy drafts, do some of the other contests they got going on over there. And of course, make sure to use promo code FSC when you do that. So, Danny, let's not waste any time. Let's start it right into the first round players, the first round running backs. Of course, on Underdog, everybody's allergic to this position. Nobody wants to take the running back position, but there are some legitimate legendary upside guys. Christian McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Saquon Barkley is these guys that we have listed here as first rounders. That's basically where their ADP is, but we do kind of see it as a bit of a mini tier between CMC, Bijan, and Breece, and then after subsequently Jahmyr Gibbs and Saquon.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. If you're drafting on on Underdog right now, in terms of the best ball streets, you'll find that once you go through the draft, basically every single round, it almost feels like you like the running back projections at their spots rather than the wide receiver. And it starts at the top, man, with Christian McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall. They're all guys that should be gone within the first 6 to 8 picks of your drafts. And I mean, like you said, they have legendary upside in their range of outcomes. I mean, we're talking about Christian McCaffrey, a guy that averaged 24.5 PPR points per game. Breece Hall, first year off his ACL, is able to produce a top 5 point per game type of season. And Bijan Robinson, yes, I understand, for the longest part of last year, we're talking about, cursing out Arthur Smith, talking about how he's not using Bijan correctly, but Bijan still had a very productive rookie season. And now entering year 2 with that improved offense with Kirk Cousins coming in, they're just such crystal clean projections to be dominant top 3 to 5 running backs.
Yeah, I mean, even though Bijan's season was a little bit murky and a little bit annoying, I mean, 214 carries and 58 receptions, despite it says he played all 17 games. There was that infamous game where he didn't get a single touch because he had a headache or whatever. So, I mean, having a season where you almost have 300 touches and 58 of those being receptions, despite Arthur Smith being a total clown show and using Tyler Algier on the goal line, only scoring 8 total touchdowns. We saw the glimpses of the ability. We know what happens first year to second year with these running backs. And then you bring in all the surrounding factors of not only Kirk Cousins coming in, but also Michael Penix Jr. coming in as the backup quarterback in case anything happens to Kirk Cousins. It really insulates Bijan's overall upside. And both of those quarterbacks are not really mobile. And Desmond Ridder was, as much as we gave him shit for being a bad quarterback, they used him on the goal line. In goal line rushing situations, he did jet sweeps read option type of carries in the red zone. So to me, I look at this, having an immobile quarterback is good for Bijan's receiving upside, and he already had 58 receptions last year, and it's good for his goal line upside. And as a second-year running back, the game should slow down for him. He's still got a great offensive line. The Rams rushing scheme that they bring in with Zach Robinson has notoriously used one running back. They used Kyron Williams, a 195-pounder last year, as a workhorse 22 touch per game guy. What do we think they're going to do with Bijan Robinson, a guy who is 220 pounds, who can handle a big workload, who can contribute potentially an 80-plus reception season out of the backfield as well?
Yeah, the thing with Bijan Robinson last year, if you're subtracting out the game where Arthur Smith basically gave him 1 touch just to shut up the fantasy crowd and basically didn't play him, he had 299 opportunities in 16 games played. He only scored 8 touchdowns. The regression is coming. We're expecting, again, like you said, that Rams run scheme to really increase the value of this rushing offense as a whole. And I can't state enough, man, although Kirk Cousins, you may have your gripes with him in terms of real life play. You don't, he doesn't show up in the big moments, whatever. I don't care. In terms of fantasy, he is very friendly for what this offense can project. This is an offense that was one of the worst in the NFL with Desmond Ridder, with Arthur Smith calling the shots last year. You add in Zach Robinson, you add in Kirk Cousins, a guy that has perennially led top 10 level offenses in the NFL. He's just such a crystal clean projection. And the fact that you can take this type of profile in the mid first round just kind of goes to show you that, man, this is a wide receiver landscape and we're all living in it.
Yeah, absolutely. They were 24th in pass offense DVOA last year, Desmond Ridder. And that seems like a generous 24th, to be honest. They were borderline unwatchable.
Was that Nate
and
Tice?
Everybody is going to benefit from it. And Bijan, to me, is the biggest beneficiary of it. As much as Drake London's going to be better and, Kyle Pitts we're excited about, Bijan, to me, is the biggest beneficiary of this Ram scheme coming in, of Kirk Cousins and Penix coming in at quarterback. Love that for Bijan Robinson. I mean, Breece Hall, you touched on a top 5 season, 1 year removed removed from an ACL tear is ludicrous.
Absurd.
We haven't seen anybody do that since Adrian Peterson, Jamal Charles, like back when me and Danny couldn't even drive. Like, we're talking a long ass time ago that it took a running back coming off an ACL tear to be this productive. And Breece Hall absolutely crushed down the stretch in a bad offense, also on the back of high level receiving upside as well. So Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey had a legendary season last year. I could see all three of these dudes absolutely crushing, putting up a 24, 25 point per game type of season in full PPR leagues, because all three of these dudes play in improved offenses. I mean, CMC's was obviously really good before, and all three of these dudes have legitimate 75 plus reception upside in addition to 250 plus carries and 10 plus touchdowns.
100%. And I mean, not far off of them. I do feel like this is a kind of a mini tier after those top three guys, legendary level projections. Like I said, with Christian McCaffrey, those two running backs with Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, young guys that potentially take that next step. This next year, I kind of view with Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, and Josh Jacobs. For the purpose of the aesthetic, Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley, because they go higher in drafts, we'll have them in the first rounders area. But I do think there are a slight mini tier after those top three.
Yeah, and with Jahmyr Gibbs, we just talked about it with Saquon, or with Bijan. It's projecting a first-year running back to get bigger workloads in their second year has been something that has been very, good heuristic to follow in redraft leagues, especially when you factor in, there was a tweet from Ryan Heath where he talked about 9 of the 10 biggest workload increases over the last 10 years came from first-year running backs going into their second season. So with Jahmyr Gibbs, we know David Montgomery is there. He's probably going to score 8 to 10 touchdowns on the ground this year, because that's kind of what David Montgomery's role is in the backfield. But this backfield is very reminiscent of the New Orleans Saints backfield of Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara, especially when you consider it's the same offensive scheme. Jahmyr Gibbs, the same exact type of running back as Alvin Kamara, and Mark Ingram and David Montgomery also very similar. So Jahmyr Gibbs and Alvin Kamara, when Kamara went in his second year, he finished as a top 5 running back. He was a monster, 81 reception type of season that year. So I think with Jahmyr Gibbs, the obvious value is going to come in the passing game. I see a bigger receiving uptick. I see a bigger rushing uptick for Jahmyr Gibbs. David Montgomery is still going to get his, and that's why he's behind these top 3 guys. But a 20-plus point per game season is still within the range of outcomes, because you and I both probably believe the Detroit Lions are one of the top 3 teams in the NFC, one of the best offenses in the league overall, and they run through these 2 running backs. And Jahmyr Gibbs has a big time role increase, in my opinion, coming for him.
Yeah, so when he came back from injury in week 7, he did miss a couple of weeks there in weeks 5 and week 6 against Carolina and Tampa Bay, respectively. Once Jahmyr Gibbs got healthy, came back in week 7, we were talking about a guy that was averaging 19.4 PPR points per game down the stretch in the fantasy weeks. Yes, technically that's excluding his week 18, but we weren't counting that in fantasy. And not to mention, Detroit Lions were literally not playing their starters for the entirety of that game, knowing the seeding coming into that week. So in the fantasy relevant weeks, when Detroit had something on the line, Jahmyr Gibbs was a near 20 PPR point per game scorer. Like you said, very good projection for the offense. Ben Johnson running the scheme. Jared Goff, kind of similar to Kirk Cousins in the sense where, yes, he's not a Josh Allen, he's not a Patrick Mahomes, but for your fantasy environment, he is the type of quarterback you want. He's not the type of quarterback that is going to be, single-handedly leading an offense 2 points. He's the type of quarterback that is going to be able to manage the game, that is going to be able to get Jahmyr Gibbs in good spots. And Jahmyr Gibbs is the type of running back, you give him a clean touch and he can take it yard.
When you're talking about 67 targets starting in that week 7 area with the Baltimore Ravens game all the way through to the NFL playoffs, 67 targets in 15 games is a very reasonable projection for a guy who was a rookie last year, who had another guy in his backfield that probably had a bigger role last year than he will have this year. So with Jahmyr Gibbs, yeah, I think the reasonable range of outcomes is 110, 120 target upside this season. He has the potential to really flash that receiving skill set that we saw from him at Alabama and at Georgia Tech coming out of school. And he also has much more upside, I think, in the ground game, in the red zone, to have more touchdowns on the ground this year. So I'm seeing the type of dude that's going to have a top 5 season, in my opinion. It's really hard for me, like looking at the receivers at the top of the draft board. I love all these dudes, right? Like Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, these guys, like I love these dudes. They're such easy projections. But like, I also kind of want pieces of these running backs, because we know what it takes when you get a 25, 22 plus point per game running back, how big of an advantage he can be at that position. Of course, the receivers are safer projections, but man, the top 10 is loaded this year.
It's so good. And for reference, Jahmyr Gibbs' current ADP on Underdog. So for reference, I'm just going to go over the top 4 quickly. Christian McCaffrey, consensus first overall pick, makes sense. 24 plus PPR points per game. We don't have to spend much time there. Bijan and Brees Hall being top 8 picks at 7.0 and 7.7 ADP. And then you get to this area with Gibbs at 12.0 and Barkley, which we'll get into next, at 15.7. Saquon Barkley, formerly of the New York Giants, he's been the workhorse there since 2018, goes to their in-division rivals this offseason as a free agent with the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, if you guys have watched the Philadelphia Eagles play offense, you know that this is very valuable from an efficiency standpoint, given the scheme, given the offensive line at hand in that system.
Yeah, I mean, Saquon's been a top 10 running back in 2 straight years. He was RB5 in 2022 with 17.8 PPR points per game. He was RB9 last year at 15.9 PPR points per game. And we're talking about 2 of the worst offenses in the league. I mean, the Giants were 30th in points for last year. Daniel Jones got hurt and shit hit the fan, man. They were starting Tommy DeVito and there was nothing going on there. The Philadelphia Eagles have elevated the play of Miles Sanders and DeAndre Swift, guys who are definitely inferior talents to a guy like Saquon. And I think we're getting a big workload here. I'm sure a lot of people are going to really be laser focused on, well, the tush push is going to steal goal line touches from him or whatever. But to me, I look at it as it's possible that Saquon steals tush push touches because Jason Kelsey's no longer there, who was part of the reason why the tush push was so successful. And also maybe they were doing that play so often because they didn't trust DeAndre Swift on the goal line. They didn't trust Kenneth Gainwell on the goal line. So maybe it's not a chicken or the egg situation. Maybe Saquon is the reason that they're not going to run that play more often. But even if that's the case, even if they still run that play, Jalen Hurts rushes in 12 touchdowns and siphons Saquon on the goal line. He still has 10 plus touchdown upside, 250 plus carry upside, 75 plus target upside. This is a dude that legitimately is such an easy projection. And when you click the button on a Philadelphia Eagles starting running back with the ability to take any touch to the house, you just feel good. You feel like you can sleep at night.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, not to mention, if people think he's just going to inherit what Swift did last year as a reason to be down on Saquon Barkley, the Eagles had the opportunity to bring back DeAndre Swift. Instead of doing so, they went and acquired that running back upgrade that they set out for. They gave Saquon Barkley a best in the league level contract at the running back position. There is a clear intent for him to be that workhorse running back on the Philadelphia Eagles. So if you're going to use Miles Sanders and DeAndre Swift's usage as a reason to be lower on Saquon, just expect that none of them hold a candle to the talent that Saquon Barkley has.
Yeah, exactly. It's to me, it's just don't overthink fantasy sometime. It just seems like a really easy transition. It's an easy projection to see a guy who's been a multi-time RB1 finisher go to an offense that is way better than any offense he's ever played in. And again, from a real schematic football standpoint, it's very hard to defend a read option of Saquon Barkley, Jalen Hurts. It's very hard to defend as a defense to defend the run when the offensive line in front of Saquon Barkley is easily the best he's ever played with as well. So it's such an easy projection. If you're picking at the 111, 112, 201, 202, and Saquon Barkley is on the board for you, it's just such an easy button to hit.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. He's a guy that I have ranked as my 14th overall player, goes a couple picks after on Underdog. And sometimes I've found in these Underdog drafts that he'll start slipping to the 2.7, the 2.8 as people take I don't know, Nico Collins and Brandon Ayuk and other, second round wide receivers over him just to try to get ahead of the wide receiver 8 ball. So if you're in an Underdog draft right now and you start Jamar Chase in the first round and somehow Saquon Barkley falls to you back in the second round, you're getting 2 guys that can break fantasy in any single given week.
Yeah, and if you're thinking just from a managed redraft league, he'll probably go at the back end of the first, I would imagine, in most people's managed leagues, because like I said, he's an easy projection. He's a guy playing for the Eagles. I'm still comfortable taking him there. After those top 10 names, which is the first 4 running backs here, and then the top 5 or so wide receivers, I have Saquon Barkley as my 10th overall player in managed redraft leagues, especially if it's a PPR league and maybe it's not a huge, massive 3 wide receiver, 3 flex, or you have any kind of running back bonuses like I do in my home league. I think Saquon Barkley factors in as a guy who I would be comfortable taking in that 10 to 12 area in redraft.
Yeah, and another guy I'd be comfortable taking in the top 15. And yes, technically he's in the second to third rounders tier because Saquon Barkley does go a little bit ahead of him on Underdog drafts. But I personally view the second tier as Gibbs, Saquon Barkley, and Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. Obviously, with Jonathan Taylor, we were literally just talking about the Eagles scheme. The maker of that Eagles scheme just so happens to be the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts there with Shane Steichen. Improved offensive line. Anthony Richardson is expected to be fully healthy after that shoulder injury that limited it last year. And to be honest, this is just a bet on an elite talent getting back to an elite play.
Yeah, I mean, he averaged 19 touches per game last year on the 10 games that he played. He's had just these shaky, like 11 game season, 10 game season the last 2 years, and he's still been really productive. I mean, 15.6 points per game is RB12. It's not what you drafted last year, but with Anthony Richardson going down, with Jonathan Taylor having his own issues, just a lot went wrong for this Indianapolis Colts running game. And like you said, this is a scheme that elevates the play of bad running backs or subpar running backs into, really talented and efficient runners. And Jonathan Taylor is one of the best running backs in the league from a pure talent standpoint. He has the 4.3 speed. He has the ability to break off long touchdowns. We've seen back in 2021, he had a 22 point per game season, was the number one running back in fantasy that year. So for me, I look at Jonathan Taylor as a guy that, he can maybe recapture that 20 touchdown upside that we saw from him back in 2021.
Yes.
Maybe he doesn't quite get to that level, but there's not a whole lot going on in his backfield, man. Zach Moss is gone. They bring in like these day 3 running backs behind Jonathan Taylor. I'm really not worried about his workload whatsoever. I think he has the potential to be a 300 carry running back and a 50 catch running back or a 50 target running back this season. And with Anthony Richardson there, that's going to open up the rushing lanes a little bit more when you have that type of rushing threat at quarterback.
So his first game back, because obviously if you guys followed along last year, you would have known that he missed the first 4 games with the injury. Comes back week 5 against the Tennessee Titans. Only garners 7 touches, only garners 15% of the snaps and 4.4 PPR points. If you were to subtract that game from his rest of the season, you're talking about 152 PPR points in 9 games played. And the more telling stat is that despite Anthony Richardson being out for portions of last year, specifically the majority of the time that Jonathan Taylor was on the field as the starting running back, we're talking about a guy that scored 8 touchdowns in those 9 games. Like, we're talking about a legitimate difference-making scorer at the running back position, a guy that when the team is inside the 5-yard line, he's getting the rock.
I don't think they played a single game together. Anthony Richardson
Did they not?
and Jonathan. They did not.
Wow.
No, I think that Anthony Richardson missed, he started missing games around that Titans game or whatever. They didn't play a single game together, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, Jonathan Taylor has definitely some untapped efficiency upside increase given that Anthony Richardson is coming back and he has that mobility, and the offensive line has been improved the last couple of years since that 2021 season, obviously, when they were really dominant. So for me with Jonathan Taylor, again, I feel very comfortable hitting the button on him in like the mid-second round where he's going, late second round potentially, where you can get him in some of these wide receiver avalanche rooms on Underdog. And again, in managed leagues, maybe he's more of like a late first, early second, but I'd still be comfortable if you could double tap Saquon, Jonathan Taylor, and start a double hero RB that way in like a running back heavy room. Maybe it's a half PPR, 2 running back, 2 wide receiver start. I would feel pretty comfortable with that.
Yeah, I will just say to preface this, like this has to, like, if you're going to do something like that, it has to be in an RB heavy room, because point blank, we're going to get into wide receiver position in a couple episodes, whether that's the next one after this or the one after that. And you'll notice, like, once you get to certain points in the drafts, you're not going to want to take the wide receivers, hence why I kind of like taking them early.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a fair point. It's really all going to depend on what your league scoring format is. But I like these 6 running backs that started off, man, like they're just such rock solid projections that I'll figure it out at wide receiver if I need to, because I want access to the 20+ point per game upside that they have. The next guy that we're going to talk about here is Josh Jacobs, running back now of the Green Bay Packers. He was formerly, of course, with the Raiders for a number of years. I think people are really hung up on, Josh Jacobs not getting the same workload that he got in Vegas, and the fact that, his efficiency was down last year relative to, he was RB3 in points per game in 2022. He was 19.3 PPR points per game. He was just shy of like a league winning season, especially where you drafted him. He definitely was a league winner because you were getting him in like 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round at some points in your draft. Last year, 13.9 fantasy points per game, not nearly as good of a season, but it was all kind of based on the Raiders offense. They were just such a, mid team. They were just not exciting at all. The team that he goes to now has so much young talent there. All the receivers are young. The quarterback is young. The tight ends are young. Their offensive line has saw some upgrades in the draft as well. To me, with Josh Jacobs, I really don't care if he never gets 340 carries and 53 receptions again, because that's what he had in 2022 when he was 19.3 PPR points per game. If he has a solid 260 carries and 40 targets or 40 catches or whatever, I would feel very comfortable saying that he's going to finish as a mid to back end RB1, because that offense, he hasn't scored more than like 10 touchdowns more than a couple times in his career. He scored 12 touchdowns in 2022. And I feel like he is a lock to match his career high 12 touchdowns this year.
Also, fun fact, has never caught a receiving touchdown. So maybe that changes with Jordan Love, obviously a guy that finished, I believe, 2nd in the NFL in passing touchdowns last year. Maybe has a little bit more receiving upside, because we've seen how Green Bay uses their running backs between Aaron Jones, between A.J. Dillon in the past couple of years. As much as I like Aaron Jones, especially last year, I think before last year, Aaron Jones was the better running back. But at this point in their careers, I have a better projection on Josh Jacobs, the runner, than I did Aaron Jones coming into the season, just simply based off age.
I disagree. Everybody keeps saying that. They're like, dude, I'll take Aaron Jones healthy over Josh
Well,
Jacobs healthy
I would
any
take
day of the week.
Jacobs. I would take Jacobs.
Okay, I've
Yeah,
heard a
I
lot of
think
people
Jacobs.
say
Yeah.
that. Why did the Packers pay an inferior running back instead
No.
of keeping Aaron Jones? I'm like, I
I would
don't
take
think that
Jacobs.
he's inferior at all. I think he's better at carrying a workload. And we've also never seen this guy not
Yeah.
carrying a huge workload. Like, there's a chance that his efficiency really takes a spike up if he sees, 18 touches a game instead of 23 touches a game like he was getting in Vegas.
Yeah, no, exactly. Not to mention, I mean, obviously Aaron Jones has made his hay as one of the more efficient goal line runners, but even when he was healthy last year, he just wasn't scoring touchdowns. And that was kind of an issue. The Green Bay team needed their running back healthy, needed their running back inside the 5, inside the 10 to really open up the offense. And we saw it when Aaron Jones was healthy against Dallas in that playoff game. I believe he scored 1 or 2 touchdowns in that game specifically. That when you have a healthy running back that can carry between the tackles inside the 10-yard line, especially in a Matt LaFleur scheme, the way he can open up that offense and give such easy carries, easy volume inside the tackles with motion, with that passing game with Jordan Love, I think Josh Jacobs is a lock for 9+ touchdowns on the ground.
Yeah, dude. Like when I look at the Green Bay offense, they're a top 10 team in neutral run script rate. Like they want to run the ball. They're not even though they have Jordan Love and they had Aaron Rodgers before that, they're the type of team that wants to be a balanced offense. And AJ Dillon, Marshawn Lloyd, they're probably going to get carries here and there. But like I said, 250 plus carries and, 40, 50 targets. Like Josh Jacobs is still the best receiving back on that team. Even though Marshawn Lloyd has some upside in that area, I still trust Josh Jacobs, especially in pass pro, over Marshawn Lloyd at this point in time. So I think people are going to really overthink him. I think he has a chance to fall to like the 3rd, 4th round of people's leagues. And I'm going to scoop shares, a lot of them, because I get him on like 4th round of underdog drafts right now. And to me, for a guy that has such spike week potential, a part of that offense, I feel really good about him.
Yeah, he is clearly our biggest discrepancy in terms of where we have him ranked versus where his current ADP is over on Underdog. So for reference, we mentioned Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor. Saquon Barkley, 15.7 ADP, Jonathan Taylor, 15.8. I actually thought there was a little bit more of a discrepancy, but it makes sense stylistically that they'd be close. After that, I mean, there's a couple guys that we haven't yet talked about. And then there's Josh Jacobs at a 39.2 ADP. 39.2 for the guy that I currently have in my overall rankings as a top 24 player. He is my player overall 22. And even that's kind of hedging a little bit because, to be honest, from an optimistic projection standpoint, I think you can make the case as a top 18 player.
Yeah, I have him at 16, dude. Like I don't have to take him that high, but that's where I have him ranked in terms of like where I would take him in like a redraft league. And again, on best ball, like you don't have to take him that high. So there's no reason to take him really before like the 3rd round. But right now, I think he's one of the biggest values on Underdog right now. And of course, again, if you guys want to do some best ball drafts, head on over there and use the promo code FSE. But the next couple guys we can kind of rattle off in a row here because I feel like all of them have like a different thing to the table that they bring. With Devon Achane, I mean, this is Danny's pet cat right now. You're going to be all in on this, dude.
Oh, yeah.
He is kind of like the cheaper version of Jahmyr Gibbs a little bit.
Yes. Yes, 100%. And that's exactly the outline that I see. Basically, exactly what you said for Jahmyr Gibbs. Young, explosive, efficient running back, coming off his rookie season where he impressed, entering year 2 is the biggest correlator to increased production, increased workload in fantasy. You mentioned with the Ryan Heath article. Yes, do I expect Devon Achane to command the same type of receiving volume as Jahmyr Gibbs? Absolutely not, which is why I have Jahmyr Gibbs as a top 12 player and why I can get Devon Achane at that 2-3 turn. With Devon Achane, you're betting on a hyper-efficient running back that can score on any single touch that he is given on a top 5 projected offense in the NFL with Miami. On top of all that, what Devon Achane does so well, this scheme perfectly aligns with him. Like, I understand projecting it for 7.8 yards per carry, very optimistic. I understand it. But this was a guy on 14 opportunities per game last year that in the healthy games he played, the 9 games that he played with over 10% of the snaps, he averaged 21.2 PPR points per game, 126 touches in those 9 games, over 10% of the snaps, which again, like I said, 14 touches per game. This is the workload bump that we want to anticipate going into their second year. This is the Alvin Kamara case. This is Jahmyr Gibbs' case, like you said before. Only Devon Achane can be had at that 2-3 turn, whereas you had to take those guys high. You had to take Kamara at the 106. You have to take Jahmyr Gibbs in the end of the first round. With a guy like Devon Achane, I can start off with Tyreek Hill. I can start off with CeeDee Lamb. wrap back at my 2-3 turn and still get a guy who has a projectable ceiling that can break fantasy. So for me with Devon Achane, he's the type of guy where if I get my anchor wide receiver and I can still get that elite legendary upside at running back in the second round, he is going to be my pick every single time. He's a guy that I have currently ranked as my RB8 overall. And to be honest, by the end of the summer, I can't even guarantee he's going to be that low. I think he can even work up higher.
Yeah, so I'll poke a little bit of holes in Devon Achane because I still really like him. Like, don't get me wrong, he's like my RB10. So I still really like Devon Achane in that like early third round range is where I kind of have him ranked. But the thing I'll poke holes into is, I mean, the Miami Dolphins lost a little bit on their offensive line. That could affect his efficiency. He was extremely efficient, right? Like 7.8 yards per carry. Even if we project him to be a top 5 running back in the league, yards per carry wise, he'll probably more so like 6 yards per carry, 5.5 yards per carry, which would really decrease his overall yardage production from last year. Again, maybe he sees an increased workload. I think that's a very fair point, especially year 1 to year 2, as we talked about with Gibbs, as we talked about with Bijan. Very likely to happen. But they also still have Raheem Mostert, who led the NFL in touchdowns last year. They brought in Jalen Wright, spent a 4th round pick, traded up in the 4th round, gave up their 2025 third rounder to do so. So I think that they're going to have a role in mind for some of these running backs. And I think Mike McDaniel, coming from that San Francisco 49er scheme, is going to want to keep Devon Achane fresh. And I think he can be a top 10 running back. He can be a top 8 running back, maybe even a top 5 running back based on his efficiency, what he brings to the table. But I'd be hard pressed to see him have like any more than like 17, 18 PPR points per game at his absolute ceiling, just because he's 188 pounds or 186 pounds. He's not going to command a 20 touch workload. So the way he has to get there really is like 150 carries and like 80 receptions. And to me, that's a really optimistic projection given the other receivers in that offense, given the other running backs in that backfield.
So 150 carries as his projection?
I would say so, yeah, because if he gets to his high range of outcomes, you want him to get more targets than he does get carries, because I think Mostert is still going to get like 200 carries if he stays healthy.
Well, 150 would be like 9 carries per game. Like, I think, like, if we're projecting it, he had 14 opportunities per game last year. He's entering his second year. Literally just the exact same case you made for Jahmyr Gibbs. Touchdown score equity with David Montgomery versus Raheem Mostert. I think Devon Achane, if we're projecting Jahmyr Gibbs to be able to take some of that role, why can't we do that with Devon Achane? They're both slight backs.
I agree, but like the challenging thing that I have with these guys is the Dolphins ran the ball like 450 times last year. And when you take out like Tua's rushing carries and all that kind of stuff, like Tua ran the ball 35 times. So we're talking like 420 carries for the running back position. Jalen Wright's there. Raheem Mostert's there. Devon Achane, like I think it's optimistic to say he gets over 200 because that would mean that Raheem Mostert is extremely overvalued right now. And also Jalen Wright is probably like a red shirt this year if that happens. So which could happen. Like I'm not discounting that. It could be Jalen Wright is the replacement long-term to Raheem Mostert. And of course, you know, Mostert's been an injury prone guy and that's probably how Devon Achane gets there. But if we are projecting health right now and all 3 of these guys play 17 games or whatever, I think it would be hard for me to get Devon Achane well over those carries. To me, if he gets there, it's going to be on the back of receptions.
Sure. And the one thing I will just finally say on Devon Achane before I move on is that with Devon Achane, like, it's not like he got 18 opportunities per game to get to the 21.2. Like he only had 14 opportunities per game and he was legitimately a top 3 level running back when he was healthy last year. So I view Jalen Wright as insurance to Raheem Mostert, an older running back that's been injured these last couple of years. He had 18 rushing touchdowns last year. If we're doing the math there with Devon Achane going into his second year, if we're expecting Jahmyr Gibbs, like I said, to chip into David Montgomery, I really do feel like that 18 touchdown workload that we saw from Raheem Mostert isn't sustainable with how good Devon Achane was down the stretch last year for them.
Yeah, no, it's fair. I think it's really going to come down to like which guy is overvalued because one of them is. Is it Achane or is it Mostert? I tend to think it's Mostert, but at the same time, I'm still a little bit worried about like when you try and sit down and project this offense out, it's challenging to get Achane up to like a top 5 running back season or top 8 running back season. It's very easy to get him if you're just following heuristics, you know, draft a explosive second year running back. He should get an increased workload. I think just when you're projecting it out, it becomes challenging.
No, and I agree that would be the downside, especially, I mean, even comparing to some of the running backs in this range. We'll talk about ETN, we'll talk about Kyron, we'll talk about Pacheco. Safer workloads, I would agree in that regard. But when I'm talking about a running back going into his second year, and the only real downside is, maybe he doesn't get the quite carry uptick that we think. I'm hitting the smash button every time because if he does get that uptick, like we're talking about a guy that can hit 22 PPR points per game very easily. He was at 21.2 last year.
Yeah, again, I just find it challenging in the games that Achane is out there, that he's going to hold up to that big of a workload given his size and given the other backs in that backfield. I don't think that McDaniel will just put a huge workload on him either. So again, a lot of heuristics that you could follow, a lot of like projections that you could follow. He's going to be a divisive guy. Like, again, if he's there in the third round, I think that's very fine. But there's guys that I like a little bit better, Pacheco being one of them. And the reason I like Pacheco better is because his backfield competition is Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Deneric Prince, and a bunch of UDFAs. And Isaiah Pacheco is literally the starting running back for the Kansas City Chiefs, averaged over 16 points per game down the stretch last year, saw an increased route participation up to 45%, down from 30% early on in the season and in his rookie season. So, I mean, I look at a guy that is going to ride his way to a 12-plus rushing touchdown season, 1,000-plus rushing yards, maybe gets an uptick in the receiving game this year, and he plays with Patrick frickin' Mahomes, and they just drafted a guy who's the fastest receiver in combine history to stretch the field, get guys out of the box. Travis Kelce, that'll help him out as well. Marquise Brown can stretch the field as well. So I just think they've built this offense very well, and I actually think the sneakiest winner of Marquise Brown coming in. Everybody's talking about what it's going to do for Kelce over the middle. I think the sneakiest winner is how it's going to open up the box for Pacheco.
Yeah, you're not going to get me bad-mouthing Pacheco for what it's worth. Devon Achane's my RB8. Jacob's my RB7. Pacheco is literally my RB9 right now. So I completely agree with you in the fact that the community is underrating him right now. Like, he's a fringe top 40 guy. He's currently a guy that I'd be willing to take in the early third portion of my drafts. And I know you tweeted it out. You'd be comfortable taking him in the second, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think he should be a second round pick. And I know, back in the day, we weren't always the smartest as a fantasy community, but I think we're overthinking Isaiah Pacheco a little bit. Like, back in the day, starting running back for the Kansas City Chiefs would be a first round pick. But at the same time, now he's like a late third, early fourth. Like, to me, we swung too much in the other direction, where to me, I think it makes sense that mid to late second round is where he should be going. And that's not where he's going right now. Maybe in home leagues, that's where he'll go. But again, I feel better about Isaiah Pacheco, his projection, his upside, what I think he can be, than Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, Brandon Ayuk even. Like, the guys that are going in the mid-second round at wide receiver, to me, are lower level projections than what I can expect out of Isaiah Pacheco, because I see a dude that is going to command a 70+% opportunity share in the best offense in the league.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And for reference, in the playoffs as well. So there was a stat, I believe, quoted by Hayden Winks, that down the stretch, he was the RB3 in terms of half PPR points per game, I believe, after their bye week. You can quote me. Again, shout out Hayden. Very good work over on Underdog Fantasy. Not to mention in the playoff weeks, especially when the games were on the line, when a Super Bowl ring was at stake, 25 opportunities, 16 opportunities, 28 opportunities, and 24 opportunities in his playoff weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Impeccable workload for the Kansas City Chiefs. He was a huge, huge guy to have in playoff best ball last year, and I think that momentum is going to continue into the regular season this year. Kyren Williams, a guy that we have a little bit lower than I think a lot of people are willing to put him. He was great last year, right? RB2 in points per game, 22 touches per game, breakout season for the Rams. But they drafted Blake Corum in the third round. Kyren Williams, undersized running back, wasn't able to hold up to that workload last year. I talked about it in the running backs to target and avoid video. We've never seen a sub 205 running back be a multi-time RB1. They've blipped on the radar. Kyren Williams, guys like this have come up before where they get a big workload, but it hasn't been a sustainable thing. And I think knowing that they drafted a guy like Blake Corum, who's really good on the goal line, really good in between the tackles, Kyren Williams already banged up in OTAs right now. I'm just getting bad vibes from taking this guy in the second round. Like, if he's available in the third round, I think that's a reasonable price tag to pay. But in the second round, and he is going ahead of Pacheco, he's going ahead of Devon Achane, going ahead of Josh Jacobs. I can't pull the trigger at that high of a price tag for me. And I like Kyren. I think he's a good workload guy, but I'm worried that if the workload is what he has, then how does drafting a third round running back not impact his value?
So this is a guy I was comfortable taking in the late second until kind of these vibes came in. I completely agree with you. And again, people may be watching this be like, well, how are vibes going to take over your analysis? Like, you got to be better than that. And shut up if you're going to say that realistically, because at the end of the day, man, vibes do matter. It really does. When you're getting all these reports that he's dealing with hamstring injuries, Blake Corum's impressing. Blake Corum's a running back I've seen close scope for the last 3 years, knowing he can handle a workload if Kyren's not ready. Like, I just can't take him right now in good faith, especially over Devon Achane and Isaiah Pacheco. And to be honest, now that I think about it, I can't take ETN. I can't take him over ETN either.
Yeah, exactly. Again, it's nothing against Kyron. I think he's like a third round guy, but
Yeah.
I'm going to be monitoring this situation closely. He could be the type of dude that has a great season the year before, and then he kind of ends up being a bust the final year in fantasy. Like, think of maybe not quite to this extent, but remember Kenyon Drake when he had that monster season
Yeah.
with the Cardinals at the end of the year, and then we all took him at like the 1-2 turn, and he was just horrible. Like, I could see that being the case with Kyron Williams for no other reason that his workload is in jeopardy. That's really all it comes down to. He's not going to get, in my opinion, an 85-90% snap share like he got last year.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Kyron. Obviously, he was a very big staple, especially if you got him, as a UDFA after your drafts going into the year or as your biggest fab spend in the first 2 weeks of the season. If you were able to pick him up last year, like he probably winning you a championship. It's just the fact that sub 200-pound running back, team adds Blake Corum, a guy that, to be honest, from a talent standpoint, are we really sure that Kyron's all that more talented than Blake Corum?
Yeah, dude, like again, if the guy was leading the NFL running back position in snaps and they drafted a major piece of competition last year because they had nobody. They had Zach Evans was useless. Darrell Henderson was signed off the street. They traded Cam Akers. Like they had nobody behind Kyron Williams last year, and Blake Corum can play. He is probably the highest floor of any running back that was in this class. He's not maybe the highest ceiling guy, but he can play. He can take 10 to 15 touches per week off of Kyron Williams' plate, and they've probably sensed that they need to do that because Kyron only played 12 games last year because he wasn't able to hold up to that big workload. He was awesome when you had him, but he wasn't obviously awesome when you didn't have him. So Travis Etienne is the final guy of this tier, probably the biggest projection, I would say, although that's kind of weird to say considering he finishes the RB2 overall and the RB, I think it was 7 or 8 in points per game. Last year, man, when Trevor Lawrence was healthy, Travis Etienne was on a tear to start the season. He was averaging almost 20 points per game in PPR leagues before Trevor Lawrence's injury. Etienne kind of really fell off as the season went along, and so did this entire Jacksonville offense, to be honest. But I feel better about their projection this year for a number of reasons. Number one, Travis Etienne didn't look really healthy down the stretch, nor did Trevor Lawrence. They brought in Brian Thomas Jr. and Gabe Davis to stretch the field. That'll help out the offense as well. They were starting a rookie left tackle last year. He's got another year in the NFL. I just think I look at Travis Etienne. He was so inefficient last year, 3.8 yards per carry, 5.1 the year before that. I think that was mainly just him tapering off down the stretch of the season. And I feel like, especially early on in the year, he can get out to a really hot start because Tank Bigsby hasn't done anything in his NFL career. I don't really feel like he has any backfield competition. And I believe in Trevor Lawrence. I believe in this offense to bounce back. People have said like, oh, what has Trevor Lawrence done to earn a contract extension? Well, year one was Urban Meyer. So we all threw that one out. Year two, he led one of the biggest playoff comebacks in NFL history. And then year three, he was 8-3 before he blew his shoulder and ankle out. So for me, I look at this offense and I look at Trevor Lawrence and I believe in the quarterback. I believe in the talent of the running back. And nobody seems to care that Travis Etienne caught 58 passes last year.
Yeah, no, 100%. When I'm looking at Travis Etienne, yes, you can argue the inefficiency, but at the same time, like you said, if defenses know that Trevor Lawrence physically can't throw a football or physically can't maneuver out of the pocket, like they are going to hone in on the run game. And we saw that down the stretch, like you said. Last couple games, like outside of one really good game against Carolina, who is letting everybody run against them, we're talking about 2.5 yards per carry, 3.1 yards per carry, 2 yards per carry against your Buccaneers, 3.56 yards per carry. And that was completely when Trevor Lawrence was compromised. So, I mean, we're still talking about the guy who averaged 5.11 yards per carry in his first official year as the starter. Because obviously, if you guys are tracking back, his rookie season deals with, I believe it was the Lisfranc injury in his foot, right?
Yep.
Yeah, he comes back in his sophomore year, is literally averaging 5.11 yards per carry. Looks like one of the freshest breakout running backs in the league in terms of the young projection. Like we were talking about Travis Etienne, like we are talking about, Jonathan Taylor, like we're talking about Devon Achane, like we're talking about, Jahmyr Gibbs, Breece Hall. Like he was in that discussion. And one bad efficiency year with his quarterback being hindered by injury shouldn't really derail us off of that.
Yeah, and like I said, he was literally RB7 in points per game last year in this like bad year where all this stuff went wrong. So to me, if you see any kind of uptick with the Jacksonville offense, and if Travis Etienne plays a little bit better, and again, people think he's like a bad receiver or whatever. He was like top 5 in yards per reception last year. Like, I don't get why people think he's a bad receiver. It's like that quote he had at Clemson where he said, "I'm afraid of the ball" or whatever back in like his sophomore year. People are still holding that against him right now. So again, Etienne, literally a top 7 running back, and it didn't even feel like it last year. To me, I feel like he is one of the biggest, like, kind of bounce back-ish candidates, even though he was literally a top 7 running back in points per game last year. So yeah, I feel really good about him. Next tier running backs, we're kind of venturing into the running back dead zone a little bit, maybe in that like third-ish, late third round range is where these guys start.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll speed through these guys a little bit faster. We wanted to give you guys that full outline of the guys that you have to take earlier in this drafts. But like Corey kind of said, you kind of got a mix of, these dead zone workload projected backs with some of these guys with some upside. So, I mean, Derrick Henry is the classic workload back. He's the guy who's handled, I mean, I think he has the most current touches of any running back in the NFL. Is that facts?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, it definitely carries. I mean,
Yeah.
Derrick Henry might have lost a step at this point in his career. He's like 30
Yeah, for
years
sure.
old, but he's going to fall ass backwards into 15 rushing touchdowns this year. Like I would love to fade Derrick Henry and say that he's not going to be good, but it goes back to kind of like the Saquon with the Eagles point. How do you stop
Zeke.
Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson on a read option? Like, how do you stop that? Like, again, even if Derrick Henry has lost a step physically, doesn't have the same level of burst that he did, he is a workload back that has a legitimate 15 plus rushing touchdown upside.
Well, for reference, so 2021 Ezekiel Elliott finished as the RB7 in PPR. And that was way after he was considered washed. Like, we're talking about 2021 Ezekiel Elliott. Like, prime Ezekiel Elliott, 2016 to 2019, 2020 area. 2021, I mean, this was a guy that was averaging 4.2 yards per carry, not a huge receiving workload, and he finished as the RB7. Like, I understand, does Derrick Henry have that top 3 point per game type of upside that he did in the prime of his career? Absolutely not. But Baltimore's going to score a ton of points. Derrick Henry is also a 250-pound running back that once they get inside the 5, good luck trying to stop Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry.
Yeah, legitimately too. I mean, difference in offense that Derrick Henry played for last year. We're talking about the 4th best scoring offense in the NFL versus the 27th best scoring offense in the NFL. Yeah. So again, even if they dial back his workload a little bit, he's kind of like the mini Josh Jacobs a little bit. It's like we've seen this guy be productive. He's going to a way better team. That's the thing that I keep coming back to. He's on a way better team this year. Offensive line's got some concerns. They've lost some pieces, but I feel pretty confident that Derrick Henry is going to rush in a lot of touchdowns this season. So pretty easy projection. Again, do I think he has RB5 upside? Probably not. He's probably more of a back-end RB1 type of ceiling, but I feel pretty confident he could return on ADP if you get him in like the 3rd round or even the 4th round potentially. In some rooms. These next two guys, Rachaad White and James Cook, both young running backs, both guys that have good receiving upside. James Cook obviously plays for the better team with the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen there. And James Cook has a receiving core that's pretty decimated. Not a lot has been proven there. You got Curtis Samuel, Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, Dalton Kincaid at tight end. I think James Cook has a chance really to catch a lot of passes this year as a result of that. And Rachaad White, I mean, he had a top 10 season as a second-year running back, and nobody seemed to care last year.
Yeah, 100%. So you'll make the case for Rachaad White, and then I'll come back with James Cook. So I'll let you just talk about your Tampa Bay Buccaneer. You'll talk about him, and I'll just go with James Cook.
Yeah, with Rachaad White, I think you look at a guy, like I said, top 10 season last year in points per game as a second-year running back. Normally, those guys are way elevated up the board. We're so excited about them. We love them in Dynasty. We want them in redraft the following season. Usually, like I would be curious to see how many top 10 running back seasons we got out of a second-year running back who were not taken in the top 3 rounds of redraft leagues the following season. Like that's a rare thing that Rachaad White has accomplished. And the reason that people are down on him is because he averaged 3.6 yards per carry last year. He had 64 receptions, which is awesome, 70 targets, and him and Baker Mayfield seemed to establish a good, rapport there. And when you talk about weighted opportunities per game, he was number 4 in the NFL with 272 carries and 70 targets last year. So big time workload. They bring in Bucky Irving. Maybe that impacts his receiving workload a little bit. But to me, as a Bucs fan, the interior of our offensive line was not good at run blocking at all. And that 3.6 yards per carry, to me, it's more an indictment on the interior offensive line than it was on Rachaad White. And I watched every game of this team very closely. He got better running the ball as the season went along. You bring in Graham Barton to play center. Big time upgrade over Robert Haynes. He was one of the worst dudes in the league last year. You got Cody Mauch in his second year. You bring in Ben Bredesen from the Giants and the Ravens formerly. He can be a good fill-in guard. There's a big open competition on that interior offensive line. And to me, I feel like it's going to be a lot better this season, especially as a run blocker, because Rachaad White runs very patient, and he can't run patient behind a bad offensive line. If you guys think about when Le'Veon Bell went to the Jets, that's what it looked like for Rachaad White last year, where he's trying to run patient, but he doesn't have the interior dudes up front to push the pile. And that's what was happening for him. So for me, I see like an increased efficiency type of year coming from him. And he has a chance really to improve on what he did last year. Even if he sees a little bit of a workload decrease with Bucky Irving coming in. I mean, Bucky Irving's an undersized back. He's probably just going to be a change of pace dude. Chase Edmonds was like a 20-30% snap share guy behind Rachaad White. And I think we could see kind of the same thing for Bucky Irving.
It's definitely fair. And for James Cook, I mean, it's really just the bet on does he get more goal line opportunity than he got last year? Because if he can, like he's gonna smash. Like even on only 2 rushing touchdowns last year, he finished as a top 12 running back. And like I understand once you do the points per game, he's more so a mid-range type of RB2, but that's considering the fact that he only had 2 rushing touchdowns on one of the best offenses in the NFL. Josh Allen had what, 13, 14, 15 rushing touchdown on his own right last year, which is just remarkable because Josh Allen is freaking Josh Allen. It's going to happen. And I understand there is a worry that with Ray Davis coming in, maybe he can handle that goal line work, but it's also an older rookie running back that they got on day 3. James Cook was literally an 1,100 plus yard rusher, the guy who was arguably the most efficient receiving back in the league last year. Like, I don't think people realize just how good he was as a receiver. We're talking about a guy that on 54 targets had 44 receptions, 445 receiving yards, and 4 receiving touchdowns. Like, this guy was absolutely massive, especially when you isolate in the games that Joe Brady took over. Like, this guy was legitimately being used like an Alvin Kamara light in the receiving game. So we're talking about a guy on one of the best offensive projections in the league, a top 3 to 5 offense in Buffalo, that if he can just get a little bit more work between the tackles, especially inside the 10, especially inside the 5, and instead of 2 rushing touchdowns, has like 6 or 7 next year, we're talking about a guy that can legitimately be a mid-range RB1. It's just a question mark. Does he get those carries?
Yeah, I mean, dude, he had 237 carries last year. I actually don't even think that's, if he does that again, or if he gets anywhere close to that again, I would feel pretty confident in that. I actually think, like you said, he has upside to have like 95, 100 targets, given that the whole receiving core is decimated without Gabe Davis, Stephon Diggs there. He averaged 10.1 yards per reception last year, which was second among all running backs in the NFL. He was number 6 in the running back position in yards per route run. He was really good as a receiver, man. Like the upside for James Cook is that he has 87 receptions or something this year. Like that's where he gets his upside from. So for me, I feel pretty good about him too. Like, I mean, he's available in like the 4th round in a lot of drafts. And I think he's not a prototypical dead zone running back. You don't see 3rd-year running backs attached to good offenses who have receiving upside like this in the dead zone very often.
Hear me out. So obviously Keon Coleman's going to be the wide receiver one off the board in best ball drafts for the Buffalo Bills. But to be honest, at ADP right now, I really like the feeling of Dalton Kincaid and James Cook as ancillary pass catchers to attach to Josh Allen if you're building a Bills team.
Yeah, I mean, I think the offense in general, I feel like people are just expecting somebody's going to become the number 1 receiver, and it very much might be like by committee across the top 3 receivers, the tight end, and the running back. Like, I think it's just going to, Josh Allen's a good enough quarterback. He can carry an offense without a number 1 receiver. We saw Mahomes do this last year with the Kansas City Chiefs. I could definitely see Josh Allen doing it with the Buffalo Bills. The next 2 guys here, I mean, Mixon and Kamara are just pure workload guys. They're obviously over the running back age and touch apex, but Joe Mixon was solid last year for the Bengals. He goes to the Texans offense. They have 3 stud receivers on the outside. CJ Stroud's a stud quarterback. They're going to be in the red zone a lot. And Joe Mixon, would it shock any of us if he rushed for 1,100 yards, carried a big workload, scored 15 touchdowns, and averaged 3.6 yards per carry?
No, it wouldn't shock us because that's probably what he's going to do. He's going to be a top 5 to 10 offense. And Joe Mixon, whether we like it or not, I understand, like, does he have RB3 overall in PPR points per game in his range of outcomes? Probably not. He's not a good enough player to do that at this point in his career. Can he be the RB8 in points per game with 14 rushing touchdowns and 2 receiving touchdowns? Absolutely, because I believe in CJ Stroud. I believe in this Texans offense. And, I mean, just being a part of this offense as a whole, like David Montgomery scored 13 rushing touchdowns for the Detroit Lions last year. And imagine if you had David Montgomery's role in the goal line with also some receiving upside with Joe Mixon.
Yeah, I mean, 52 receptions last year, 60 receptions the year before that. Like, he has legitimate receiving upside too. And like the guy's averaged 4 yards per carry last year, 3.9 the year before that. He's not an efficient running back. He never has been, really, honestly. So with Joe Mixon, I'm done doubting this guy. Like, this is, of course, going to be the year that he gets injured and ruins my fantasy league. But to me, I'm kind of just done doubting that he can carry a workload and be inefficient and still be a good fantasy back, because is he a good real life running back, in my opinion, at this point? Not really, but he's going to be a good fantasy running back in this offense. Same goes for Alvin Kamara, man. Like, not really because of the offense, but because of the receiving upside and because of the workload that he's been seeing. I think some people might be concerned that, Kendre Miller is going to work in, or Jamal Williams, who's still there, might work in. Dude, Alvin Kamara was RB3 in points per game last year when he was healthy. So, and off of the suspension or whatever that he had. So I feel pretty good that Alvin Kamara, even in that New Orleans Saints kind of like, maybe they're like the 22nd best offense in the league, I think he's going to catch a lot of passes, man. 75 receptions last year in 13 games. That is a ridiculous
Absurd.
amount of receiving work. 17.9 fantasy points per game. Derek Carr's still there. He still can't move. He's still going to be checking down constantly.
Yeah.
So I think Kamara is going to be one of the more underrated guys in the running back dead zone. Again, there's risk there. Obviously, he's old. They have other running backs in the backfield, maybe have bigger roles. But I don't see any of these running backs in the backfield running routes. And I think that's where Kamara is going to get his value.
At the end of the day, sure. Is Kendre Miller probably going to take, he had 223 carries in 15 games, Alvin Kamara in 2022, 180 in 13 games last year. That's about a 250 to 270 carry projection across a full season. Is he going to get exactly that with Kendre Miller coming into his second season? Probably not. But if he gets 220 carries and has 80 plus targets, he will finish as a top 12 to 15 running back. And it kind of feels like we're just taking him at his projection. And if he has some more touchdown luck than he had last year, 6 touchdowns in 13 games last year, 4 touchdowns in 15 games the year prior, if this offense just regresses to me, maybe Chris Olave takes that next step as a stud receiver, Derek Carr's fully healthy across the season, can he not hit 8 touchdowns? And if he does hit 8 touchdowns, is he going to finish worse than RB12?
Yeah, no, he has a chance to really only finish high if the Saints are better than we think. That's kind of what's going to happen with him. But otherwise, I feel him pretty confident that he has a back end RB1 kind of almost floor, which is crazy that we're talking about him down here. But it's again, the difference kind of between the ceilings of the other players going around him. Kenneth Walker and Ramondre Stevenson. I mean, Walker is just going to be a big play merchant because he only had 219 carries last year. He was RB 23 in points per game, RB 20 in points per game. So I wish Kenneth Walker was alone in this backfield, and I wish Zach Charbonnet was on the Cowboys or something right now, because we would have 2 really solid RB2 or back-end RB1 projections if that was the case. But that is not the world that we're living in. Zach Charbonnet is going to eat into his role. Year 2 running back, as we talked about, going into his second year with Zach Charbonnet, maybe he eats into the role even more than Kenneth Walker had last year. So for me, it's just he's probably going to touch the ball 16, 17 times a game, and that's good. And he could be an RB2 on that projection, but his ceiling's RB14 if Zach Charbonnet doesn't miss any time or whatever the case is.
That's kind of where I'm at with it. If you're assuming health of both these guys in the backfield, obviously the implied upside, if one of them misses time, the other one could be very, very good workhorse type of role. But that's kind of what keeps them from being with the other names in this 4th to 6th rounder area for me, in my opinion. I view the tier as Henry, White, James Cook, Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara. Slight tier break, and then I get down to Kenneth Walker, Ramondre Stevenson, and I'm not going to unveil exactly who, but 2 of the guys in the tier below. So with Kenneth Walker, like you said, not elite volume, efficiency dipped last year. A little bit worried about the projection of the Seahawks offense coming into this year versus what we had with that Geno Smith breakout year 2 years ago coming into last year. So I'm just a little bit more pessimistic on him. I would rather have, to be honest, straight up, I'm going to make this change. I would rather have this next guy with Ramondre Stevenson straight up over him, because I have no questions about where the workload of the New England Patriots is going to go. Ezekiel Elliott, obviously off the team. Damien Harris a couple years ago, he was on the Bills last year, but he's retired from the NFL. There's really nobody that I feel good about taking a big touch workload off of Ramondre Stevenson. Yes, they brought in Antonio Gibson, but has Antonio Gibson showed us any confidence that he can handle a full workload?
Yeah, I think with Stevenson, you're basically betting on exactly the same case of Stevenson 2 years ago. We were taking him in the 3rd round last year, and Drake May's an upgrade at quarterback. Even Jacoby Brissett, if he starts most of the season, is an upgrade at quarterback to what they had going into the season with Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi. They made some additions on their offensive line. They made some additions at wide receiver, Jalen Polk and Javon Baker coming in to help, maybe stretch the field, get some defenders out of the box. Ramondre was a little banged up last year too. If he's just a little bit healthier this year, I think that he could be a lot better. I don't see his projection very much different than I saw it last year. And last year, like I said, he was a 3rd round pick in most redraft leagues and best ball too. So I look at him this year and I'm like, yeah, I'll take him in the 6th, 7th round where he's going, sometimes even later than that. On Underdog, I think you can get him 7th, 8th round at times. So for me with Ramondre Stevenson, I'm like, yeah, he's basically exactly what he was last year, only way cheaper. So yes, I am much higher on him this year.
So for reference, obviously got off to that really, really bad start in the first 4 games, clearly was banged up. Efficiency metrics were completely terrible. He just did not look like the same running back objectively. And if you isolate once he finally started picking up in the mid portion of the year prior to him getting hurt at the late portion of the season, between week 6 and 12 is when he was fully healthy. How many PPR points per game do you think Ramondre Stevenson averaged in that stretch when he was
I think
healthy?
he was averaging like 16 or 17.
16.2 PPR points per game. He was a legit top end RB2, low end RB1 in that time frame. So with Drake May coming in, with improvements on the offense as a whole, without teams having to key in on Ramondre Stevenson out of the backfield, I really do feel like we can see that efficiency jump back up to where it was 2 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way I feel about Stevenson. Is I think he's just kind of like he's going like in like the 7th round in a lot of leagues, and I think he's just a good like return on investment type of guy.
Yeah.
Maybe he's only like a high end RB2 or whatever, but given the price tag, I feel like he's absolutely worth it at that point in time. So let's speed through the last tier, guys. And we'll just kind of highlight guys that we want to talk about because we've gone a little bit long here. We got DeAndre Swift, now of the Chicago Bears, Aaron Jones, now of the Minnesota Vikings, Raheem Mostert, Tony Pollard, David Montgomery, Jonathan Brooks, 2nd-round picks to the Carolina Panthers in the NFL draft, Javonte Williams, and Nick Chubb. Does anybody stand out to you in this tier? For me, the guy with the highest ceiling here is probably Nick Chubb, if he's healthy. Yeah. But also, I really like the ceiling of Javonte and Jonathan Brooks, because if they can carve out big roles in their backfield, they could be 3-down guys. But to me, I think Nick Chubb is the one that you have to kind of monitor throughout the offseason, because if he's hitting all the landmarks that he needs to hit, he's coming back. It was early in the season that he suffered that ACL tear. Of course, he suffered an ACL tear in the past, and he's a little bit older, so we're a little bit nervous about him. But you're getting him at a point where you never would get Nick Chubb in years past, right? Like you're getting him 7th, 8th, 9th round of your draft, and he's still could be the same player that he's always been if he's able to recover. And knowing the guy that Nick Chubb is, like everything you hear about Nick Chubb is he works harder than anybody. He's the best teammate in the world. He's the type of dude that could absolutely just smash coming off an ACL tear, and it wouldn't shock me.
100%. I really like Nick Chubb. And if we get very, very good reports, glowing reports about his knee at the end of the offseason, I'm comfortable putting him at the top of this tier. And if not, maybe even in the tier above. Like I really do still believe in the talent. The only question mark I have is with that knee injury, especially with an older running back. If this had happened to like we saw with Breece Hall bouncing back right away, we've seen young running backs being able to bounce back right away. With a running back like Nick Chubb, with the workload that he has under his belt, a little bit more cautious there. The two names I do want to mention are DeAndre Swift and Aaron Jones, specifically because I actually have them in a tier with Ramondre and with Kenneth Walker. DeAndre Swift, very, very efficient running back we've seen basically at every stop, has kind of some mental hurdles that keeps him from being one of the elite running backs, in my opinion, in the entirety of the NFL. But with the Chicago Bears, I expect this to be maybe not a top 10 offense right away. I really do feel like that's a too high of a projection with Caleb Williams as a rookie, but they're definitely going to be at least an average level offense. The wide receivers on the outside, the talent of Caleb Williams alone is too much for me to project them lower than like the 18th best offense in the league. And if you're getting that type of support system, you're getting DeAndre Swift, passes out of the backfield, potentially more of a goal line role than he had in Philly. Feels like a really safe RB2 projection. And I kind of have that similar sentiment with Aaron Jones. Yes, older running back, but lands in a very, very similar scheme with Minnesota versus Green Bay. Lands in a very, very good insulated offense with Minnesota, to the point where although I don't think he can reach a prime Aaron Jones numbers, he can be a very solid top 15 to 18 guy, in my opinion. And if you're getting that in the 7th to 8th round, I think you'll take it.
Yeah, I think I'm more worried about Aaron Jones than I am about Swift, because
Agreed.
I mean, Jones has been banged up for a couple of years now. And also too, like while Swift has good backs in his backfield to compete for touches with, Roschon Johnson, Khalil Herbert, I think Aaron Jones and Ty Chandler are closer in talent and in like, guaranteed money and things of that nature. Like Swift was paid to be the starter by the looks of it. When you look at the money that he was given and that kind of thing, with Aaron Jones, I'm like, Ty Chandler looked good last year, man. Like he looked really good. He's young. Aaron Jones is like 29 years old. He's suffered hamstring injuries and things of that nature. Plus, I actually believe more in the Bears offense than I do in the Vikings. So for me, I think Swift slightly over Jones for me. But those two guys are interesting. They could definitely return on ADP if you're getting them 7th, 8th round, 9th round.
For sure. And the other guys kind of all have their strengths, all have their weaknesses. Raheem Mostert scored 18 touchdowns last year, but we kind of outlined with the case for Devon Achane why we're a little bit lower. Talent of Jalen Wright, 210-pound running back for a guy that really made a lot of his hay on the goal line last year, not to mention older back, dealt with some injuries. I feel like Jalen Wright is the Raheem Mostert insurance. Tony Pollard was expected to be an RB1 by both of us, by the community as a whole. He was a mid to high end 2nd round pick in a lot of your drafts last year. Not quite the same running back coming off of that injury in the playoff game against the San Francisco 49ers. First half of the year really struggled for the Cowboys. They obviously move on. He heads to potentially be the 1A, potentially be the 1B. We don't necessarily know what the breakdown will be on that Titans offense, but regardless, I view Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears very, very similarly, to the point where, although I favor Tony Pollard at this current point, I'd rather just take the one that's cheaper.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same about Tony Pollard as I do about Aaron Jones, which is like,
Yeah.
I'll take Ty Chandler and Tajay Spears cheaper than these two guys, but they also kind of like, the dead zone is better than it has been in recent years, but these two guys kind of remind me of like the prototype dead zone running backs,
Yeah.
Tony Pollard and Aaron Jones, where I'm like, come on, they're a little bit older, they're a little bit over the hill in terms of their projections. They're not in like the best offenses in the world. Like, I'm a little bit more nervous about these guys. And then with Raheem Mostert and David Montgomery, they're both the same player. They're both goal line running backs on good offenses. So they're going to have weeks. They're probably going to be back end RB2s or whatever on the season when you just look at in totality. But how do we get there, right, is kind of what I'm concerned with, because both of their running backs are second-year guys that
better
have
in best
a
ball
chance to really take over the backfield potentially.
Yeah, they're the type of guys where, unless they fall at a great value and managed, I'm just not going to be taking Mostert on Montgomery. But in best ball, when you're taking these guys in the, we have 7th, 8th round, but sometimes they'll slip, especially in the wide receiver rooms that are over on Underdog. If you're getting a type of, every other week touchdown projection from a running back, especially in the offenses that they play in, I'm much more willing to take that in best ball than I am in a managed lineup league.
Yeah, but even in a managed league, if they're there in like the 8th, 9th round and you went like 0 RB or something and you're looking for 13 points per game from somebody, like that's probably what you're going to get out of Raheem Mostert and David Montgomery. It's just that, is that reliable? Like, I would rather bet on the young ascending upside of the backs ahead of them in the depth chart than I would on those two guys. I think you caught lightning in a bottle with them last year, Raheem Mostert and David Montgomery, and it might fizzle out this year.
For sure. And I mean, the final couple guys here with Jonathan Brooks, Javonte Williams. Funny enough, obviously, Javonte Williams, we know coming into last year, coming off that ACL injury, Jonathan Brooks, rookie running back, coming off the ACL injury he suffered at Texas. I'll just quickly make the case for Jonathan Brooks, and then you can go to Javonte, because, I mean, Javonte is the FSC staple a couple years ago, so people who have been following the channel for a while will know what we had thought about Javonte for the longest time. But with Jonathan Brooks specifically, was the first overall running back in the draft despite the ACL injury. I think Chuba Hubbard is a very, very solid running back. They still have Miles Sanders on the roster, and I believe they signed one other running back this offseason, right?
They might have signed somebody else. I'm not sure. I think with Brooks, you're getting potentially the Rashad White role. I'm just not sure it's going to materialize itself right away at the beginning of the year, because I think Chuba Hubbard is good enough to carry the workload for a while. It's more so like, if you're drafting Jonathan Brooks in best ball, you're drafting him for the playoff weeks. In managed leagues, I'm probably going to steer clear of him prior to like the 8th, 9th round, because he strikes me as the type of dude that you would draft in the 8th, 9th round of your redraft league, and you're just holding him for like 7, 8 games before you can use him.
And that's the kind of thing that we want to talk about, especially in redraft, especially when you know the overall psyche of a lot of your league mates. Like, if they're the type of guys that get impatient with a guy like Jonathan Brooks, like, you can pretty easily trade for Jonathan Brooks later in the year.
Yeah, and I kind of feel that way about Brooks, where it's like in redraft, I might let my league mates draft him, but in best ball, obviously, there's no waiver pickups or anything like that. You can't actually go and trade for him. You have to draft him in like the 7th, 8th, 9th round where he's going. So for me, he's a little bit of a shaky unknown. And then Javonte Williams, like you said, I mean, we just got some news about this backfield yesterday where I think it was Ben Albright was basically kind of reading the tea leaves of what Sean Payton was talking about. He said that Javonte Williams is going to be the number 1 back there. Audric Estime, Julian McLaughlin, Blake Watson, who they signed as a UDFA. They're going to work in at some point, but they kind of still believe in Javonte Williams. And for us, I mean, we've believed this guy was a 3-down back for his entirety of his time in the NFL. Only we got disrupted by a multi-ligament ACL tear early on in the 2022 season, and then obviously factored in and carried over to last year when he wasn't as efficient.
Yeah, like, I'm worried now. Like, I understand it was the first year post ACL, and maybe I'm falling into that exact trap that he's just going to look way better this upcoming year. But he genuinely looked like one of the worst running backs in the league last year. Like, that's
he was like a bottom 10 graded running back by PFF. So I'm worried about Javonte Williams. I would need to see him like light it up in preseason, light it up in training camp before I'd really buy
I'm hoping he does.
I mean, 9th, 10th round, man, he's a great 0 RB target for sure.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you want some upside at this point and you're betting on him getting back to that pre-ACL form. Again, Was the offense great last year? Not necessarily, but I really do feel like Russell Wilson, despite putting up very gaudy numbers, was a more of a detriment to this offense than people want to admit. I really do feel like Bo Nix, in terms of managing the game, is going to help this this offense sustain a lot of more consistent drives. And if that's the case, I mean, Javonte Williams, he's still got a big workload. We're still talking about a guy who had 275 opportunities in 16 games coming off of the ACL injury. I mean, this is a guy who, kind of got eased in a little bit early on, missed a couple games. If he stays fully healthy and gets back to that level, like the upside is probably, I wouldn't say RB1 because I really do feel like he's got a lot to climb over from an efficiency standpoint, but who's to say he can't be where like Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara are?
I mean, he would have to look like his rookie season to be an
That's where
RB1
I'm at.
probably, but that might be a little bit of an uphill climb. And I mean, we can kind of just scroll through the rest of the tiers. We did say this would be kind of like a top 40 running back tier list a little bit. So the last two tiers of running backs, you can see it's just an amalgamation of guys that are in split backfields, or maybe they have high upside, or maybe they're like high floor guys like Trey Benson, obviously super high upside, but he's in a split backfield with James Conner, who's in this tier as well. Jalen Warren and Najee Harris, both in this tier because they kind of cannibalize each other. If they were on separate teams, if Najee was traded to the Cowboys and Jalen Warren was alone in this backfield, I feel pretty good about their projection, to be honest, because Arthur Smith's going to want to run the ball. That offense should be improved with the quarterback play that they have in there now. Austin Eckler, don't really know what to expect from him in Washington, but I think he could catch some passes with a rookie quarterback. Zamir White and Devin Singletary are like the vanilla ice cream of this tier, where they're probably just going to get decent workloads, and maybe they'll be higher than this in overall finish, like RB24, RB26 or something like that. But I don't really feel like either of them really have a super high upside. They're just volume plays.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this is kind of the mix and match here. Did you go a lot of young upside early on? Maybe a guy like James Conner, Austin Eckler, Najee Harris is your guy. Did you grab a lot of, steady veterans like, JT or Jacobs, plus like a Joe Mixon, and you wanted to get some upside at your RB3? Trey Benson's your guy. Like this is the pick your flavor tier. Whatever you drafted early, you kind of complement it with your structure of your team. Because at the end of the day, I mean, we've talked about it throughout the last couple of years. You want your running back room to be structured in a way where you have guys that can legitimately break your league and win you championships. And you also want guys that can kind of give you that steady floor when they're coming up to speed. So for example, again, if you drafted Jonathan Taylor, I'm more likely to take a Benson or a Jonathan Brooks. If you drafted a Devon Achane or, even like a Jahmyr Gibbs, I'm probably more likely to take like a James Conner archetype.
Yeah, or if you went like straight 0 RB and you grabbed like, say, Raheem Mostert with your first running back pick, Jonathan Brooks with your second, it's like, oh, you got a little bit of risk there. Maybe you want to take a Zamir White, a Najee Harris, or a Devin Singletary to get maybe a guaranteed workload early on. Then we also have these kind of like late rounder guys. Zeke Elliott now is slated to be the starter in Dallas, so that's where we got him. We also have the Bengals backfield, Chase Brown and Zach Moss. Don't really know the split yet. I prefer Chase Brown as it stands, but they did go out and pay Zach Moss, so I got to put some respect on him. Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, no idea how the Chargers offense and backfield's going to work out. You also have Kamani Vidal there. I have J.K. Dobbins at 40,
way higher than me.
I know it's probably way higher than you. I'm notoriously a J.K. Dobbins stan. If he's healthy, if he's ready to go, I believe he can be this high. But if I hear negative reports, I would definitely move him down from here. And then Tajay Spears, Brian Robinson, also Ty Chandler kind of in this range for me. These are just guys that they're technically like the number 2 in their backfield, but they could end up being the number 1 if we're wrong kind of on the projection of their workload. So I know you're going to disagree on J.K. Dobbins. That's 100%. Just a guy that I personally have up here.
Yeah, no, I mean, like if we're talking about other running backs that I probably would have in that spot, like I'm not going to argue fully right at this point. We're literally an hour 10 into this video, if you guys are wondering, but like I would still probably take a guy like Rico Dowdle, Brian Robinson. I mean, Blake Corum, I would 100% take over J.K. Dobbins too. So if you just sub him out, like he's more of like a top 50 to 55 guy for me, not rather than top 40. Like there's just a big discrepancy for me.
Yeah, and then you also have like Jalen Wright, Zach Charbonnet, Marshawn Lloyd, guys who are kind of upside plays as well, depending on what you've built out at that point in your draft. So again, this was a longer video. We haven't really gone in depth on like the redraft scene of the running back position. We'll probably do the same thing for wide receivers. Maybe we'll try and trim it down a little bit. At that point, we should tackle quarterbacks and tight ends. While you guys are watching this, I'm probably in Europe. So we're pre-recording a bunch of stuff like this. So if any kind of news came out about any of these players, it's probably because we pre-recorded it that we didn't mention it. But we'll update anything in the comment section if anything does come out. But if you do enjoy, leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Take this advice right into action. Like I said, underdogfantasy.com right now. Using the promo code FSE, you can get up to $250 in bonus bets, a free pick'em special right now. Got the NHL playoffs going on. You got the NBA playoffs going on. There's a lot of stuff going on over on Underdog Fantasy. And of course, you can jump right into a Best Ball Mania 5 draft, win up to $1.5 million, $15 million in total prizes in that contest. They have cheaper contests like $3, $5 entries like the Pomeranian and the puppies going right now. So if that interests you, head on over to the link in the description to check out Underdog Fantasy. And when you use our promo code, you'll also get both our Dynasty and Redraft guides for free. Dynasty draft guides live already. Redraft guide will probably be live early in July when we have everything sorted out for that. So a ton of bonus stuff to you for using our promo code, in addition to just the regular site bonus of the $250 and the special pick'em entry. So if that interests you, check it out down below in the description. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.